According to new reporting in Axios, a sizable number of GOP lawmakers are thrilled now that Tucker Carlson's off the air because it makes it easier for them to support unlimited aid to Ukraine. One lawmaker said, quote, "Tucker being gone makes my life easier with many things, including Ukraine, though I think that somebody will own that space in a couple of weeks anyway."
According to Axios, when it comes to the immediate future of anti-interventionism in the modern GOP, the writing's already on the wall. Here's Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who previously said he would, quote, end blank checks to Ukraine, speaking to reporters this week.
We know that you don't support the current unlimited and uncontrolled supplies of weaponry and aid to Ukraine. So can you comment, is it possible if in the near future the U.S. policy regarding sending weaponry to Ukraine will change?
Yeah, I'm not sure. The sound here is not good. Did he say, I don't support aid to Ukraine? No, I vote for aid for Ukraine. I support aid for Ukraine. I do not support what your country has done to Ukraine. I do not support your killing of the children either. And I think for one standpoint, you should pull out. And I don't think it's right. And we will continue to support because the rest of the world sees it just as it is.
All right. So Ukraine is not the only thing that Tucker Carlson reported on and focused on that is not congenial to the establishment of the Republican Party. I think one of the reasons he had the platform that he did and why he was the most popular show on cable news is exactly because of the topics that he was willing to bring up in a way that both parties, the establishment of both parties, were not willing to do. And in his video, his one sort of comment after leaving, he gives a list of these topics, and I think it is a pretty good list. War, which is what we're referring to here, civil liberties, emerging science, demographic change, corporate power, and natural resources. And he asked in that video, right, when was the last time on cable news, on a legacy media outlet other than his show, have we heard a real debate, a real discussion about some of these critical issues? So that's my perspective here. I think that it's a great loss that Tucker's not on Fox anymore, exactly because it was important to have a conduit to the mainstream for some of these issues. That being said, Tucker's going to be fine.
So I said in a previous segment, I absolutely think Tucker is going to be fine. But the way he corralled his audience around white replacement theory, anti-CRT, book bans, anti-LGBT, there was a lot that was questionable about Tucker Carlson. I think that in the only released video he has, the one that you just mentioned, some of the things that he rattled off that needed to be said to, make the discussion more formidable for the American public, things Americans needed to hear, things that they needed to be talking about and engaging in, were the very things that he wasn't known for talking about on his show. I agree with him. Those things do need to be talked about, but they weren't featured on Tucker Carlson's show either. I think for the issue at hand, Tucker was very well known for being anti-interventionist in Ukraine. He was very well known for being anti-interventionist or anti-funding for Ukraine. But he wasn't alone. The interesting thing in that clip was that McCarthy essentially before then had a conversation multiple times where he was trying to curry favor with other anti-interventionists, where he too seemed to be in alignment with Tucker Carlson on so many different things. And it's very interesting to me that now that he has the speakership, that he has decided that is the road that he's going to take. And it's a huge shift from where he was. There's a concerted group of Republicans, many of them who happen to be leaning more Trump Republican, more the Freedom Caucus Republicans, who happen to be saying that we should not be intervening in Ukraine, we shouldn't be giving monies there. But I would argue, sadly, that's reflective of many of the voices of the American people, regardless of where they stand on the political spectrum. I think part of that is because an isolationist posture has taken over in this country over the past decade or so. Some of that is because of the elongated wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The other piece is that when Americans feel that they are suffering at home, when they can't pay their rent, when foreclosures are on the horizon, when credit is in trouble, when we're seeing the fall with the banks, they are more caring about kitchen table issues in their own pockets than they are seeing money being sent to a place that they feel is so far removed from the United States, from Americans, that understanding as to why it's important and that idea of bringing democracies together and supporting democracy so that they won't fall is not necessarily at the top of their agenda.
So I think you're right that Americans are weary of intervention after Iraq and Afghanistan, especially after the disastrous pullout, which, to be clear, most Americans supported pulling out of Afghanistan, but it was done in such an incompetent way that I think it really shook a lot of Americans' faith that we can even execute whatever policy we decide we want, a foreign policy we decide we want. As Americans, it is very disturbing to think of us not being able to even, with a bare minimum of competency, actually execute on that policy. I don't think it's fair, by the way, to characterize any position, which I think you're referring to, Speaker McCarthy's position. Places like the Heritage Foundation have this as well, to want an accounting of where the money is going. I don't think that's necessarily an anti-interventionist position. You can imagine easily somebody being in favor, as I am, of sending some money and aid to Ukraine, and also thinking that it's perfectly fair to want to know exactly where that money is going, what it's buying, to actually have an accounting for the American people of that. That being said, I think it was very important that Tucker Carlson had this perspective, because it shows, and I think this is just one of many of these issues. I don't think that it's being picked out right now. The interventionism and the anti-interventionist debate is being picked out. That the Pentagon, there were some guys celebrating that Tucker Carlson is off the air, right? I think it's just one of the many positions he's staked out that, again, acknowledges that our institutions are sort of rotten from the inside. That, the generals, for example, that we would like to put our faith in, right, are inherently, they haven't proven themselves. They have medals all over their chests, but we've lost 2 wars, right? I think these are the sort of things that are really, really important to get out into the American people. I want to ask you, though, about the media landscape now that Tucker Carlson has left Fox News, right? Obviously, we're sitting here on Rising. There are lots of independent, popular shows. It seems like independent news is really taking off because Americans are sick of the conversation. The other thing that Tucker Carlson said in this video that I very much agree with is he said a lot of the conversation on cable news, he said, trust me, I've been a part of it, right, is stupid. And I think Americans rightly are tuning out of that, especially as we see, demographic change in terms of the audience. We move towards a younger audience. People your age, my age, they're not tuning into cable news at all. It doesn't matter. I'm on the right, you're on the left, right? But we're not really tuning in to cable news, and that's not really where we get our news. I think this could be a tipping point. I'm curious if you agree, because Tucker Carlson had such a huge audience, 3.5 million viewers. By the way, Fox's 8 p.m. slot is cratered, right? 2/3 of his audience is gone. Those people are not coming back for the 9 and 10 o'clock hours. There's got to be a lot of really worried people at Fox News right now. They're probably going to lose to MSNBC this month. So that will, ring all the appropriate alarm bells over there. When we saw previous top talent at Fox leave, like Bill O'Reilly or Glenn Beck, it didn't really, essentially Fox came out better than those guys did when they leave, right? I'm not sure the same thing is true, not only because Tucker Carlson is a unique talent and has a unique audience, but also because the media landscape itself has changed, right? We have Joe Rogan with 11 million views, which just blows Tucker out of the water.
I think the second part, the latter part of that, is the bigger issue here, because Fox News has lost masthead talent before, people who had amassed great audiences over time, over multi-decades. And to Tucker's credit, he has a very diversified audience in regards to what he's been able to build from several networks before even landing at Fox News. But this issue is more one of how audiences view and take in media. And I think that cable news broadly, whether it is cable news that is driven more towards the left or the middle or the far right or the right, they are largely losing audiences, particularly younger audiences, which they never really had to begin with, to be honest. Those people were always seeking out other emerging platforms. But we're seeing now that over 70% of younger Americans are getting their news from social media. They're not watching anybody's cable news show. They're streaming. They are watching TikTok. They are clicking into their favorite YouTube channel. They believe wholeheartedly in podcasts and individuals who are not necessarily tied to a major network, and believe that they are speaking the truth in more ways. And this can be positive and negative because these people aren't typically trained traditional journalists, in addition to the fact that a lot of the information isn't sourced. And we know that, quite frankly, there are a ton of conspiracy theory channels that have multi-million people followings, and that those things are getting spread consistently across social media. But I do think there's something to be said about not only the plummeting of Fox News, particularly in that primetime slot, but also acknowledging that in large part, yes, Tucker was a personality. He's still going to be able to go out here and do a ton of things and probably diversify his audience even more as he continues with his career wherever it goes after this. He's not at a loss because he's no longer at Fox News. I think that his brand in some ways was bigger than Fox News. But the bigger issue here is where media is going. And it's not only cable TV, it's also print. It's also just not being able to keep up with where the new audiences are going. And they are losing people day in and day out.
Yeah, to bolster that point, like when O'Reilly left Fox, his viewership was 6 million. He was the highest, had the biggest audience over there. Tucker had 3.5. That's not because Tucker is less popular within the cable news sphere. It's because the entire cable news sphere is smaller. But I did want to bring up one point. I don't think it's just the medium, right? It's totally true, everything you said about, like, younger audiences getting, getting their news from social media. We can talk about whether that's a positive or negative, right? But I don't think it's just about the medium. I think it's also the fact that we have this ossified sort of establishment from both sides that has a set point, list of talking points, right, that they throw back and forth at each other. And I think genuinely it's not connecting. This is why Trump's run, I think, in 2016 was successful, is because it's just leaving out an enormous percentage of the conversation and the issues that are actually affecting Americans. And they're basically screaming at their leaders like, no, talk about this. We were talking off air, right, about the fentanyl crisis, about the overdose crisis in this country, right? Tucker was talking about that issue, and I think that's why a lot of audiences were willing to tune into him, because he was talking about some of these issues that are just basically ignored by both mainstream parties. So I don't think it's just the medium. I think it's actually, we are seeing a sort of pullback from faith, not just in the institutions, as we've been discussing, right? I don't think it hurts them, by the way, that they're not trained journalists. I think people have such a low opinion of trained journalists, given how they've covered news stories for the last, 3 to 5 years. I think this is a representative of something larger, or at least I hope it is. I think this could be. I don't know if it will be. We'll find out in a year or two when we see where Tucker's influence is. I have no doubt he can build a big audience. The question is this the straw that breaks the camel's back of the really legacy outlets that have had too much control over what we're talking about? So I really hope that that's the case. But more Rising after this.